good evening from wherever you may be joining us. My name is Avi Staiman, and I am the CEO of Academic Language Experts. And thank you so much for joining us today for our 15th Publication Success interview. During these interviews, I have the honor of engaging in conversation with innovative thought leaders in the world of academia about how they're influencing the world of academic publishing in the hopes of helping authors to better understand the publication landscape and build bridges between authors and publishers. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Laura Portwood-Stacer, author of the Book Proposal Book, A Guide for Scholarly Authors, published recently by Princeton University Press. Laura is a developmental editor, publishing consultant, and author. Since founding her company, Manuscript Works, in 2015, she has helped hundreds of academics publish their books with competitive scholarly publishers. Her online programs for scholarly authors can be found at manuscriptworks.com, and practical tips about book proposals and book publishing can be found in her weekly newsletter, which we will share a link to at the end of the event. Laura holds a PhD in communication from the University of Southern California and lives in LA. And if she wasn't cool enough from that bio, Laura is also a two-time winner of Jeopardy! And hopefully we'll be able to hear from her a little bit about that as well. We invite you throughout the course of the session to ask your questions on Zoom, on the Zoom chat, and we'll try and answer them at the end of the session. If you have a more personal question or want to discuss your specific research, feel free to reach out to us privately following the interview. The interview is being recorded, and we'll send it out over the next few days, so you can rewatch whatever interests you, or you can share it with colleagues. Before we begin, I want to take just one quick moment to share a bit about Academic Language Experts, the company that I run. So Academic Language Experts, or ALE for short, provides customized translation, editing, grant writing, and publication support services to researchers, scientists, and other professionals to help them produce publication-ready texts at the highest levels. We also help scholars looking for help with their book proposals prior to submission to their dream publisher. We're grateful and proud to have helped scholars translate, edit, and prepare their research in over 50 languages. Articles and books we have worked on are often published with top academic publishers. It's our mission to help our authors achieve publication success and be a source of guidance and support throughout their journey. And now, with great excitement, I want to introduce you to Laura. Laura, thank you so much for joining me today for this chat.
Thanks for having me, Avi. Looking forward to it.
Oh, it's a pleasure. So I want to take you back to the days before you started Manuscript Works, and I understand that you yourself started out as an academic, maybe still an academic, but you slowly made the transition into academic publishing. So can you tell us a little bit about your academic background and then how you made that move from academia to publishing, why you did it, and how that ended up working out?
Sure. So as you said, I got my PhD at the University of Southern California. My area was communication. I, had planned to go into academia. I was on the job market. I had a visiting assistant professorship for a few years. I published my dissertation as a book. And that was fine. But I also had this opportunity to become a section editor at a journal in my field. And through doing that, I got to work with authors, help them get their work up to publication standards, sharpen their arguments, really figure out how to connect with the people they wanted to connect to who are reading their work. And I found that to be kind of the most enjoyable part of the job. Of course, I wasn't really paid to do that part of the job. But I kind of thought, well, what if I could do that all the time? So I decided to, go out freelance, start a one-person company to help people with their work, to edit and develop their projects. And I ended up focusing on mostly books, some journal stuff, but mostly books, because I had that experience publishing a book, and a lot of the people in the fields I was working with were working on books. And that's kind of where it started. And as I started having more clients publish, I have many of my clients' books are behind me. I'm very proud of them. I started to see the publishing process up close, in addition to what I had gone through myself in publishing my first book. And I just saw there was such a disconnect between how things work in publishing and how authors who need to navigate that process are acquainted with it and how they come to understand how things work. And there really wasn't a systematic source of explanation for how to get through this process. And so I just kind of felt I could step in at that spot. So that's what I do. And I really try to just help people with the knowledge and the sort of savvy to understand how to meet their goals. Because it can feel really mysterious.
It's so interesting because I think that sort of, if I were to, an alien landing on Earth and trying to understand what's going on, or just a typical academic, I think we've gotten so used to kind of the journal model and letting our science speak for itself, that I think that I wonder if maybe the book publishing or book proposal, thinking about it as an independent form of writing is maybe new for many people. And to be honest, maybe some people see it as a hassle because they say, if I have good research, then publish my research. If I don't have good research, then tell me as much. But why go through this sort of like different type of writing in order to get my book published? So it's fascinating to me that you actually clung on to books specifically as sort of this niche whereby people needed to understand not only, I guess, what the research is, but how to present it in a way which will be appealing to acquisitions editors.
Yeah, you touched on something really key, which is that the book proposal, which is kind of that document that pitches or sells your book to a publisher, like, is not a genre we're trained to write in. We might, if you are proposing a book for the first time, you might have never seen a book proposal before. And so you might not understand why, like you said, why do I have to do this? Can't I just show you my book and you'll see how good it is and want to publish it? But really, publishing is about, it's a form of mediation that gets your work into the hands of readers. So that proposal is about you explaining not just what's in the work, but why readers will care. Which readers is it for? That way the publisher can say, yeah, we're poised to help you reach those readers, or this isn't going to work for the people we know how to reach. Try a different publisher. So that's really where that proposal comes in and becomes really important.
Yeah, it's interesting because we were chatting about this a little bit before we went on air. Is that I think in the journal writing process we sort of get used to not hopefully we do take our readers into account, but we don't know exactly who the readers are going to be, and it's not as if our research is strong enough, it might not be critical to speak to them directly. Whereas in a book, it's really important to address and to get the readership, to write accordingly. And sometimes, I get this question a lot from doctoral students who say, yeah, just, help me turn my doctorate into a book. And I say, well, you're actually creating a new, really a new type of writing. And have you thought about who you're writing for? Because when you're writing your doctorate, you're writing for your three, judges who are going to, come and try and rip it up and show you where you've gone off. Whereas, maybe the academic reader, even if they're clearly an intelligent and well-informed reader, sort of assumes that you know what you're talking about, you have the credentials, and is coming to kind of bring you a little bit further along in the process. So maybe it would be, I think it'd be helpful. I know I was confused in the beginning by understanding the different components of the book proposal. I also want you to explain, if you can explain to us, prospectus is a word that's used. Is that part of the proposal? Is that separate from the proposal? And just organize for us in our minds what makes a proposal unique as a form of academic writing, different from other parts, so that we can, when we have the rest of our conversation, we're making sure that we're all on the same page.
Yeah. So the prospectus proposal thing is a great question, because there's no fixed way those terms get used. The prospectus usually refers to a very specific document that describes the book, describes its readership, describes the market for the book, and then some more practical details like the manuscript status, meaning like the timeline when the manuscript will be finished, the length of it, all of that stuff. And I'll go into more detail about those components. The proposal can be used just to refer to that. It can be synonymous with prospectus. But the proposal can also be used to refer to kind of a larger package that you would be submitting to a publisher, which would include that prospectus, but also some writing samples. Usually those are sample chapters from the book you're proposing. It might include your CV, your academic CV, or just truncated sort of author CV. Information about you as the author and the person who will ultimately promote the book. So that's what proposal might refer to, but I use the terms interchangeably, really. And mostly to refer to that prospectus document that is about the book that you're then submitting to a publisher. So yeah, I think it's good we get on the same page about what's in that document. And every publisher is going to have different terms that they use or ways they describe what they want you to submit when you're proposing a book. But they're all basically asking for the same thing. They're just using different words. And there's, I think it's 9 components. So you're going to have a title. And that can be a working title. Doesn't have to be like the final title that's going to end up on the cover of the book, but basically the title for your project. You'll have a description of the project, and that can vary in length. Different publishers might have different recommended guidelines. I think 1,200, 1,500 words is a good place to shoot for. It's not super long. It's like 6 paragraphs or a couple pages. And that's where you'll lay out what's the book about, why does it matter, what's the contribution to the fields that it's entering into, how's the book built structurally, just that kind of nuts and bolts stuff to acquaint someone with the project. Then you'll be just talking about the audiences that you intend for the book. And that can be, which fields you're speaking to. That can be at which levels in those fields. Are you writing a book for students? Are you writing it for advanced scholars? Is this going to be used in courses, or is it more for research? That kind of thing. Then there'll be some discussion of the market. And this is often called competing titles or comparable works. And that's basically a list of the other books that people who will buy your book are already reading or have recently purchased. So it's market because it's looking at, well, what has been recently published in this area, and who's reading it? Why would they want a book like yours if these books already exist? Then you'll also have a more fleshed out breakdown of the structure of the book. So in addition to that project description, you'll have a table of contents, which would be, each chapter that's going to be there in the book, and then a little summary of each chapter. So that an editor or a peer reviewer, anyone who's looking at this proposal will see this is how this book is going to come together. This is how this person is going to sustain an argument over 200 pages, 300 pages, whatever it is. Then, as I mentioned before, you'll have the manuscript specs, like the technical specs, and that would be the word count of the book, or the estimated word count if you haven't finished the book yet. The number of images you plan to include, what kind of images those are they photos, are they maps, all that. Then you'll have the status. That would be how much is ready for peer review right now. When will the whole thing be ready for peer review if the publisher wants to see the whole thing? And then you'll have information about yourself as the author. So that is a bit of an academic bio, if you're pitching an academic book, but it's also a bit about your capacity to promote the book, to connect with the readers who will want to read it once it's out. So, what networks are you connected to? What kinds of public facing speaking or writing do you do? All of that stuff is really helpful to include. And then I think I hit everything there. I think the last element then would be the writing sample that many presses will ask for along with the prospectus, which is usually a couple of chapters from the book that you're proposing. I think that hit everything.
Yeah, no, I think each one of those we probably could discuss as its
absolutely
own topic, and we'll try and cover as many as we can. But before we do, I'm curious to hear from you about whether you think, at what point, at what stage is it appropriate to send off a proposal? The materials you mentioned there, you obviously will need to be pretty far into your research and know kind of what direction you're going in. But I'm curious whether you think that someone should be done half of their book, 3/4 of their entire book, or once they have a fleshed out idea of what they're looking to do and chapter or two examples, is that enough in order to approach an acquisitions editor with the idea, keeping in mind that, we'll be honest with them and straightforward and tell them this is what we're up to, and this is where we want to, and it'll take me X amount of time in order to complete the project.
Yeah, I'd say this is probably the most frequently asked question. So I'm glad that you asked it. There is no one correct moment to submit a book proposal, which can be frustrating, but can also be good, because it really should be flexible based on your career goals, your writing timeline. When I say your, I mean, authors. And so you kind of have to figure out for yourself, when do you want to start talking to an editor about this project? Do you want their input earlier on? If you do, that it's completely fine to reach out before you have much figured out. You could just have, a great idea and reach out, or see them at a conference or something and say, like, does this seem like something that you'd be interested in? Can we talk about it? That's perfectly fine. Some people want to do the work before they get other opinions about it. That is also fine. So you may need to kind of draft that full manuscript before you get a handle on, well, here's what I really want to say about my topic. Here's the contribution I want to make to my fields. That's a really hard thing to get a handle on for many people. So it can be something that comes later in that process of writing. And so if it takes you that long to do it, and then you want to write up a proposal and submit it, that's also perfectly fine. And there are many considerations, having to do with personality, and do you need a contract in hand for your department, or is an advanced contract, which is what we call it when you've just submitted a proposal and a couple of sample chapters, and then a publisher issues a contract. Some departments don't really respect the advanced contract. You have to have the book published for it to really count for career reasons. So, if you're in one of those kinds of departments, then you might wait longer in the timeline. It might not matter if you have the commitment of a publisher. It's sort of, I'm sorry, there's not like a straightforward answer to it, but I hope it's empowering to know that it's flexible.
I think that's I think it's really helpful to know that. And I also think that I have come across academics who think they need the entire manuscript entirely complete and edited. And I think that's a mistake, to wait till you're too far, because you could actually have an acquisitions editor who comes along and says, well, actually, I think the interest will be, in the second section of your book. So you need to move that around, and including them as part of the conversation, if you feel comfortable with it, I think can be really beneficial. I think that one of the things that we, as academics, we get used to, journal reviewers who are can be, sometimes, first of all, we don't know who they are. And second of all, not always helpful critique. Whereas an acquisitions editor, these are generally people, at least the ones that I've come across, who really love books, and they love writing, and they love ideas. And maybe even if you're a bit shy and, you're not used to approaching people out of the blue, I think it's perfectly okay and acceptable, and we should get used to sort of knowing who the interesting acquisitions editors are in their field. Many of them are academics themselves, so they get it. And most of them will enjoy, they're busy, and they probably have a mountain of work. So you have to make sure that you're a little bit of a, pushy to get in there, but most of them will enjoy thinking through your ideas with you. And you can actually probably judge how excited they are by their reaction, right? Go and give them the elevator pitch, 60 seconds, or send them an email and see what their reaction is. And in general, if it's something they're excited about, you'll be able to identify that. So I think that's important, is that no matter what stage you're at, include them as part of the process, because otherwise you're sort of, hamstringing yourself unnecessarily.
And I'll say too, we're talking about the moment at which you submit a proposal, but I don't think it's ever too early to start drafting a proposal, because I have found, in working with authors, that process can be really clarifying. It kind of forces you to make a plan for this book. And that can save you years of of time just kind of like muddling through the manuscript. And then it also means you're ready. If you happen to like serendipitously come across an editor or someone contacts you about your work, you have that plan at least partially formed to say, yeah, this is going to be a book someday. I'd love to talk to you about it.
Right. Got it. Now, so if we're talking about planning ahead and preparing properly, a common theme when in these conversations, and also when I speak to authors, is know your audience, know who you're writing for. And I think in this context, we're really talking about publishers. What publisher are you aiming for? So how do you even, when it comes to, again, I keep on comparing to journals, but that's a good point of reference. When it comes to journals, right? So if I'm a social science scientist and, international relations, I know more or less probably what are the major journals in my field. In publishing, I know the names of the universities, and I may be impressed by the big names, but how do I know whether a particular publisher is going to be interested in my field or in my book? And how do I go about making that short list of potential publishers that I can send to?
Yeah, this is a great question. And this is actually where I have everyone start when they go through my programs to work on a book proposal, is figure out where we're going to send this proposal so that we can be kind of thinking strategically. And in a way, you can think similarly to journals. Often when you're thinking about which journal you might look at or might pitch to, you're looking at your bibliography. You're seeing, who is publishing the kind of thing that I'm citing and writing. And that can be a way to identify presses as well, is look at the books that you're reading, who's publishing those books. One really important thing to keep in mind when looking for book publishers is recency. Because their directions can change, their willingness to invest in different projects can change. So you want to make sure that you're looking at books that have been put out in the last couple of years. So that might not be reflected in your bibliography. Especially if you're revising a dissertation or something, your research might be a few years old. So you can look in the journals that you're publishing in. What publishers' books are they reviewing? If they're publishing book reviews, that'll tell you which publishers are big in your field. Look at your disciplinary organizations, which books are winning awards or are being recognized. And then look at your bookshelf, all those things, and then you can go explore those publishers and get a sense of what else they're putting out that you might not be familiar with. But actually, I had not necessarily planned to mention this, but I have a 5-day challenge coming up at the end of April, which is all about figuring out which publishers you should be targeting. So I think you'll share the link to my courses page later on. If you go there, it's just courses.manuscriptworks.com. You can sign up for that challenge, and that will be 5 days of like step-by-step. Here's how you find the publishers. Here's how you evaluate them to make sure they're right. And here's how you kind of position your book as being a fit for their list.
Yeah, fantastic. And then as a follow-up question, let's say I have a short list of publishers. How important is it, or how do I go about finding should I try and insert myself in a series, or in my pitch or in my proposal mention a series that might be relevant, or am I limiting myself because maybe they'll think it's better for a different series, and then I started taking myself out of the game?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think if there is a series or two that you're interested in, or you think your book could fit in, it's completely fine to mention those. I mean, that can show that you're familiar with what this press is putting out, and that you've put some thought into it. But you can kind of, based on your own plan or strategy, if you're happy to publish with that press without being in that series, then you can make that clear as well. And series really work differently from series to series and from press to press. So there are some presses where they acquire the books and then kind of at the very last stage will assign it to a series. And then there are some presses and series where the series editors are very hands-on and who are doing the work of recruiting the authors into the series specifically. So it's hard to know that from the outside. So there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer to that. I think if you're contacting an acquisitions editor, make sure to contact the editor that seems to be closest to your field and your topic. And then you'll kind of figure out the series stuff from there.
Got it. Yeah, I'll also mention in terms of finding a journal, I find finding a publisher, excuse me, I find that there's some helpful resources in the AU Press's website. They've got a whole sort of chart that they update every year with which publishers at least stated what they're in, each publisher states what topics or what general fields they're interested in. You're obviously going to need to do more homework on your own to see whether your specific topic is going to be of interest to them. But
that's a great starting point.
But I think it's a good habit to get into when we're reading, when we're just sitting and doing our time in the library or, on our PCs. I think we all have a tendency to skip the first 3 pages of the book and go straight to the first, to the introduction, which is perfectly fine. And I know I find myself recently more and more paying attention to more of the, who's the author, who's the editor, who's the publisher, and when was it put out? These are all information. This is all information that I think can be really kind of tip us off to, okay, I've been in the library in the past week. 3 books have been all published with the same, publisher. Wow, maybe that's a sign that this publisher is actually really interested and really invested in my specific field. And that's someone that next time I have a book proposal, I'll be able to, pitch them directly.
Absolutely. And yeah, the acknowledgements section is a great place to look, especially to find out specific editors at the press, because most people will thank their editor, hopefully. Yeah. And so then you can find out who that person worked with. And then when you contact that editor, that's a great point of connection, is to say, I was really impressed with this book by this author that you worked with. That tells an editor, you're paying attention to the field, you're paying attention to what they put out, and you haven't just randomly sent out a letter to everybody. You have a reason for talking to them. That will get you some points.
Yes, I love that. I myself am a big fan. You can see here that I've got Laura's book. If you can, I don't know if you can see it, but I've got Laura's book sort of on my bookshelf. There you go, brilliant. And that's one thing that I really loved is sort of, I think what you did with, there's a lot of brilliant nuggets in the book. One of the things I really loved is creating a narrative whereby you're kind of continuing a conversation that has already been started. Obviously, as a researcher, you're coming to say something new about the conversation, but you can use the proposal as an opportunity to demonstrate to the acquisitions editor, right, I've done my research. I know that you've already published this book. If you publish this book, that's a sign that it's something that you care about, that interested. You already know a lot about it, even if it's not your field, because you spent time working with the author in the book. I want to, shed a new light on a different perspective, or I want to critique that approach, or I want to I want to build on it. Instead of sort of coming in and saying, and I'm sort of answering a question I wanted to ask you. Maybe this is sort of a segue to ask you, to what extent am I supposed to be, right, as a researcher, be novel and innovative, and I'm coming up with something that's, just brand new and nothing like it has ever been created since, God, spoke the world into being the first day, or am I really trying to show a continuum and a continuation of previous research? Because I think as researchers, we're always torn between those two ends. We have to come up with new materials. On the other hand, it can't be totally disconnected to the world and the of literature that preceded me. So how does that work specifically within the context of book proposals?
Yeah, I think you're getting at maybe one of the bigger misconceptions among authors is that you just have to be there will be a market for your book if no other book like it exists. That's false, because if no other book like it exists, that might mean there is zero market for that book. So it really behooves you to show how you are actually stepping into a readership, a conversation that is ongoing, because people, we all have been academics and bought academic books. We always want to buy more books. Right? It's not about having the one final word on a topic. It's about continuing the conversation. So yeah, I think it's really helpful to position yourself as adding something interesting, maybe something that's needed by readers who have already read the other books that are out there. But definitely situating yourself as in conversation with, as opposed to being the first person to speak about a certain topic or to have a certain approach.
Yeah, yeah. The words of Sylvia Fuchs, who's the editor of Brandeis University Press, sort of ring in my ear. She said, we have to stop looking at books as like as something that's inanimate. It's a live object that should be continued, even if it is once it's out in print, right? It's sort of stuck. But in the digital age, we can update, we can be dynamic with that content, and if we and we're continuing a conversation as opposed to just saying this is sort of the end all be all. Now, I know that one of the things you mentioned in the book, which I think is a really good question, and it is really challenging to authors to answer, is the who cares question. And that is when we're writing again, back to the dissertation, if we're writing our dissertation, so we have to show that we've really covered the full gamut of research, make sure that it passes muster in terms of academic rigor. But when we're writing for more, even in an academic university press, we have to answer, that can't be enough, right? We have to go beyond that and answer and ask ourselves, who's going to care? Now, I think that what's tricky for authors is that, of course, the answer is so obvious, blindingly obvious to them, that it's hard for them to kind of put that down on paper, because of course I care. This is something that I feel very passionate about. But how do you go about convincing an acquisitions editor through a written proposal about the importance of your specific subject and topic area?
Yeah, it's so tricky to get perspective on, because I think there's the, of course, people care attitude. And then I also talk to a lot of people who are like, I don't know, nobody cares. Who cares about what I'm doing? Kind of like a different inflection there. And I think kind of the way that I have found most helpful to address that is to get out and talk to people about your work. And that can mean presenting it. It can mean teaching it. It can mean submitting pieces of it to journals and receiving peer reviews, because people will tell you why they care about it. And you'll see what parts of it connect to people and make them want to continue the conversation with you. And I think if you do that enough, you do start to get a sense of like, okay, well, it really seems like sociologists of the family are connecting with what I have to say here. That's just a hypothetical example. But then, if you can sort of get that kind of context and knowledge, that's then something you can sell back to a publisher and say, well, I've spoken and published with sociologists of the family, and here's the contribution I'm making to that field. And I know that your press has a strong list in that area. And so I think your readers will connect with what I have to say here.
Interesting. Yeah, it's interesting to me, because I think I've heard a lot of publishers who say, I will invite, I'll even, they'll proactively invite authors who they've heard speak at a conference. And I think they pay attention to who's coming, right? How big is the crowd? Who are those people? And what's the reaction? Is the crowd engaged? Are they interested? And they kind of are like feeling the room. And then if they find that to be really compelling, they may actually proactively approach the author. That's obviously a dream scenario, and ask them for a book. But I know that they're sort of on the prowl, on the hunt. And by the way, I think that sometimes we haven't spoken about junior scholars versus more senior scholars. I think that sometimes junior scholars can feel frustrated that, if they don't have the name, then how do they make the name? But they don't, they can't get published until they have the name. But I actually have heard from publishers who have said, we're looking for new and innovative, approaches and ideas. And like you said, getting yourself out there, whether it's through teaching courses or through lectures, can be a really great way to do that. Now, obviously, you can't just wait for the phone to ring, right? Most scholars will need to proactively approach publishers, but the more we're in communication with the acquisitions editors in our field, I think the better we're setting ourselves up for success. Yeah.
And this is just a little tiny thing, but that's where having really good titles for your conference presentations and journal articles. You might think, it's just a conference in my field, or it's just a journal. It doesn't really have to be a sexy title, but publishers look at the table of contents of new journals that come out in their area. They look through that conference program, and they will often contact, a junior scholar just on the basis of a paper title. So that can be a way to clue people into what you're trying to do with your work.
Yeah, it's not an easy thing to do necessarily, but I had a client who was writing an article about audits and how comptrollers in different countries do audits. And, she herself would admit that it's not exactly the most, fascinating topic, but her title was The Cat with the Hats. And I I just loved it because it stuck, and the editors got excited about it just because of the title. Not we should never judge a book by its cover or by its title alone, but I think that you make a good point in terms of how important it is to think about what the title says about the book as a whole. Now one of the things that strikes me from reading your book and understanding I was hoping that you could share with us a little bit about the business side of publishing, specifically within the context of we're sort of almost giving a pitch, if I'm not, if I understand correctly, of the importance of our research, but not just the importance, also the sellability of it, right? In the end of the day, maybe it's a misnomer to think that university publishers are just, sort of doing it for the public good. I think that all publishers, definitely trade publishers, but also university publishers, are looking to be able to sell the book, for both business reasons as well as, reputational reasons. And how important, you mentioned before about, social media presence or our ability to help them market the book. How important is that? And how do I put that into the proposal without sounding sleazy?
Yeah, for sure. And I think, especially when we're talking about, well, any scholarly publishers, but especially university presses, they're not for profit. So it's not that they're trying to make a lot of money off of you. And they, in most cases, are not making a lot of money off of any one specific author. They take a loss on a lot of their books because books, cost tens of thousands of dollars to produce. And may only have a readership of a few hundred people. So you can kind of do the math and think, well, they probably aren't seeing everything that they're investing in it. But they exist to connect scholarship with readers. Like, they're not printers, they are publishers. They're trying to get it out into the hands of readers. So if it makes you feel less sleazy, think about it as readership versus buyers. People who will actually be interested in the book and want to talk about it and share it and all of that. So when you're talking about your capacity to sell the book, you could really think about it as your capacity to make sure people know about the book or make people interested in the book. And that can be via social media. A publisher will be happy if you have a lot of followers and are talking about your book's subject matter on social media, but I don't think they're expecting that of a lot of their authors. I think it's better to think holistically about, are you getting out there and talking about your work? Are you connecting with new audiences about it? Are you going out and giving talks, or writing public facing or discipline facing things that kind of get your name out there? Are you active in your organizations? Do you have, an officer role or something like that? If you have a blog or a newsletter or something like that, even if the numbers aren't huge, but if it's like people come to you and they want to know about X topic, that's the kind of thing publishers are looking for in acquiring authors.
Yeah, I think there are probably a lot of disease specialists who were 3 years ago were not we're very much anonymous and then became thrown into the limelight. So we never know exactly when our field is going to become important or interesting. Okay, but but I want to dig a bit deeper, and specifically in the bio section, because I think in your book you mentioned how the bio is an opportunity to talk about how you are the best person, the best fit to kind of be the person to write this book. Not just that it's interesting, it's innovative, it's novel, but actually based on your background, this is what gives you the qualifications. But I wonder if, maybe that's can be a bit uncomfortable for some authors. How do you talk about yourself in a way that's, flattering without making it seem like you're, not self-aware or narcissistic?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, the thing I say in the book, I think I say this, is that facts aren't bragging. So if you have actually accomplished something, if you actually have a social media following of 10,000 people or whatever, or you are actually a leader in your organization or actually got this job, that's not bragging. That's a fact about you that this publisher might not know yet. So you're just providing them with information that helps them. And it is a tricky balance. You don't want to come off as grandiose, but know that publishers don't want your book to just languish in obscurity. They want people to find out about it. So anything you can say that shows that you can help people find out about it will be welcome.
Got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Let's talk. I want to get quickly to the question of comparable titles, because I think this is where we, at least in our work, we see a lot of confusion about what is the goal of, right? I want to place my research within the context of the greater conversation, but I also want to show that it's different than what's been done before. So how do you recommend going about that? And what if my research I do really feel, we joked around before about it being so novel that maybe no one will publish it, but what if I really do feel like I'm coming to say something that hasn't been said before and that's different? So then how do I build that, the comparable title section?
Yeah. So again, the list of comparable titles or competing titles, sometimes it's called, or, complementary. It's not there. There's two things it's not. It's not a literature review. So that list is not meant to establish that you have read all the right things or all the classics in your field. I mean, it is there to show that readers right now are buying books similar to your book. So there's that. You want to be thinking about recent books, that are kind of aimed at a similar readership to what you're doing. And it's also, that list is also not there for you to tear down the other books and kind of, point by point say what's wrong with them and why yours is so much better. It's really about showing, if there are people out there who have read this book, whether it's on the same topic as yours or not, maybe it's not on the same topic, but it takes a similar approach, or it's in a similar field, or it could be used in a similar type of course. If there are readers out there who are reading that book, what will they get out of reading your book if they read your book next? And so it doesn't have to be that you are they did something wrong and you do it right. It can be, well, this book covered the subject from this angle. I bring in this other angle that I think readers are really going to find interesting, or that readers from this specific part of my field will be looking for after they've read this other book. So yeah, I would never say to really heavily critique the other books in the list. You never know who's going to be your peer reviewer, and those books may have been published by the editor you're contacting. So they probably won't feel very good about you if you're kind of saying what's wrong with the other books they published. But it's your chance to show that you have something to offer and you're kind of ready to be a new colleague on the scene with those other authors. And I'll also say you don't need to go into great detail about the other books. Sometimes people, I'm sure you've seen this, get really into the nitty gritty of like the theoretical framework of another book, or the specific research site, or something very minute. And that is not super helpful in the book proposal. You want to think big picture, like selling points of the book, like why are people reading that book, and what can you add, and think at a pretty high level, not at a super minute level.
Yeah, I'm sorry I keep on quoting your own book back to you, but one of the things I loved, which I didn't think about enough, was acquisitions editors are most likely not going to be experts in your field. They will be experts if you're contacting, the humanities acquisitions experts. They will be intelligent enough to read and to be able to analyze and assess what you're writing, but they're not necessarily going to be a 18th century French literature, expert. So you can write at a high intelligent level, but if you get into the weeds of, the debate between, you don't expect them to know if you're referring to a very specific debate and you don't expound upon what that is, don't necessarily assume that they're going to know exactly what it is. It will eventually get to peer reviewers that probably will be a little bit more familiar with the specific subject. But if you never get there because you're stuck, because the acquisitions editors don't get what's going on, then you haven't done anything. You haven't accomplished your goal. So that's, I think, sort of builds on what you're saying is to know how to write in a way that's going to be accessible to the acquisitions editor and pique their interest as well.
Definitely.
All right. Okay, we've got a lot of questions. I've got questions left. We've got a lot of great questions in the Q&A. So we'll try to do some rapid fire work here to to kind of try and address as many as we can. But a few last questions that I wanted to ask is a common issue that you see, one in every 2 or 3 scholars making, common problems that you say, if you're gonna, don't make this mistake, what would you say?
Yeah, I would say one of them is what I just said about the comparable works.
Okay.
Don't treat it like a lit review. Stay big picture. Think about recent books. And then the other one I would say is when you're getting into those chapter summaries, that is your chance to kind of explain how the book as a whole works together and to kind of demonstrate that you've been thoughtful about constructing this book. So don't just say, the content of the chapter. Also talk about, well, why is this chapter 1? Why does chapter 2 come after chapter 1? How does chapter 3, every chapter, serve the bigger picture of the book? That's something people kind of forget to do in the chapter summaries. But it can go a really long way to really making the case that this book needs to be a book. It's not just a collection of journal articles. It's not just like whatever I threw into my dissertation that I now want you to publish as a book. I've thought about the reader's experience of this book and why each piece of it is going to be valuable to them.
Nice. We've talked a lot today about the, sort of what's on the shoulders of the scholars to do to make this process work more efficiently. I'm curious if you have any insights, if we have any publishing reps that are here today about, from your experience, what publishers can do to make the process a little bit easier for authors? Because I do know that I've had a number of conversations with publishers, and I think there's an understanding that, sometimes there are anonymized forms. Sometimes it's hard to find, who the right editor is. What do you think you would say, or like, if you were in charge and given an endless budget, what would be your top priorities in terms of fixing up the publishing world to make it, the whole process run a bit smoother?
That's a great question that I don't think I've ever gotten before.
All right. Well, I knew I asked a lot of the questions, so I just try to throw in a wrinkle, throw in a curveball.
Yeah. I mean, I think publishers can be a little myopic about is, the way things have always worked, and maybe not understanding who those things have not worked for. So for example, I see a lot of editors and they really mean well, but they're like, just come up to us at a conference, just talk to us, just tell us about your book. And that conferences are not accessible for lots of people for lots of reasons. B, some of us suffer from social anxiety and aren't just going to be able to walk up to you and give you this beautiful elevator pitch about our book. So I think, editors understanding how to make themselves approachable to like actually diverse scholars, being in the places where those scholars are, understanding the modes by which those scholars are able and want to have conversations. And I do think a lot of editors and publishers are trying to do this, but I think for many people, it's either not on their radar or they just don't have the exposure to enough different kinds of authors and people to understand where their gaps might be.
Yeah, no, I think you're totally right. This brings me back to the conversation I had with Christy Henry, who's the director of Princeton,
who is wonderful
last month, who's lovely and wonderful. And we were talking a lot about, I think that most, there's sort of a sense among many scholars. It's like, okay, well, if I don't attend Cambridge, Yale, Oxford, Princeton, I'm not going to be able to publish in Cambridge, Yale, Oxford, Princeton. Even like an understanding of and part of that is based on historical trends, and is for the publishers to understand. Well, actually, if we limit ourselves to Ivy League universities, there's there are brilliant scholars that are there, and they should be supported. But if we kind of never look beyond that and look into different different backgrounds, different socio economic areas, different types of colleges, different types of people, we're actually impoverishing research in the end of the day. And I think that's really kind of an important message that I think publishers really are, Christy is sort of leading the charge on that in trying to bring those voices to light and give everyone who's in here today, no matter where they're from and what their background is, a feeling of, yeah, if I do this the right way and if I'm serious enough about my research, I can achieve, forgetting about the name of the particular university, but I can achieve, publication with a really top university press.
Yeah, and I would also say, even that term "top university press," I think needs a little,
Fair enough. Critique taken.
destabilizing, just
For
because
sure.
the reputation of the university does not always correspond to the reputation of the press, especially in a particular field or subject matter. And so, like, we might think, well, these are the leading presses, but are they, or are they just the biggest presses, or are they just historically the leading press in political science? If you're writing from a different area, there might be a different press that's just perfect for you, that might not be that big name, but might be more accessible, and not just like easier to get into, but a better fit for you and the audiences you're really wanting to speak to.
Yeah, that reminds me, in the second half of 2022, one of the topics that's on our agenda, it has not been finalized yet, but is a panel with small university publishers. We want to sort of like talk about like what their role is, and how and the advantages of working with a small university publisher, and not to look at it as just like a ranking. I think we get a little bit too obsessed with top 10 lists and rankings. So I think you're right about that. Okay, I'm very strict about time. We're gonna go a bit long today, just because I think this is really interesting. Anyone who does need to run because they have previous commitments, we completely understand. But anyone who wants to stick around, and I hope, Laura, that's okay with you if we go a bit longer, because we've got a lot of interesting questions here. But I do want to give you an opportunity to just tell us a little bit more about Manuscript Works and the courses that you offer, so that scholars who are interested can learn a little bit more and can get the help they need.
Yeah, great, thanks. So as I said, I started out as a developmental editor. I just kind of worked with authors on these book length projects, but I have really kind of embraced the book proposal as the thing I want to help people with, and because there's only one of me, I've sort of branched into online programs to try and reach and help as many people as I can. So I have a couple of them. You can find all of them at courses.manuscriptworks.com. Some of them are free, some of them are paid. I have one that is called my book proposal shortcut. That's a self-paced course you can access anytime, that kind of walks you through step by step. Here's how you identify a press. Here's how you write that letter of inquiry you're going to send to an editor. Here's how you build a proposal that's going to impress them. And then I also have my book proposal accelerator program, which is a group program. It's not self-paced in the same way. It's live. So it will start in June. Oh, thanks for bringing up the page there. And that, I'll be working with a cohort of scholars on book proposals, again, doing that step-by-step breakdown, but that will also include live Q&As. We'll have some guest editors in there from the presses that people are targeting. We'll have some live co-working sessions. And then that will include a full year of support, because I know people, you get to that stage of submitting the proposal, and then it's like, well, now what? This editor wrote me back and said this, what do I do now? And so I love kind of helping people sort of strategically navigate that whole process after that. So that is what the book proposal accelerator will be. So yeah, you can find out more about all of that at that website. And then my newsletter is where I give as much free advice as I can and answer people's questions. So that's newsletter.manuscriptworks.com. And so I love to have people read that as well.
Great. That's fantastic. I'll also add that, shameless self-promotion, after you're done taking Laura's course, definitely do that. We offer sort of more individualized feedback and support on proposals that have already been written. If you've worked with Laura, you probably, are in good shape, but there's always, particular help and review that you can get from us through our book proposal review service to help you sort of improve your chances and perfect and iron out your proposal on a one-on-one basis. So you're welcome to check that out as well. I also want to encourage everyone to check out our upcoming events. We've got an event. It's monthly, so you're welcome to always check it out at April 25th. So that's less than a month away. We're going to be talking about how, once you've used Laura's services and been successful in publishing your book, how do you get it out there, and how do you establish that presence and help with the dissemination of your own research? So we're going to be talking to Dominique Deroux, who's the Vice President of Marketing at Brill, as well as Tomer Persico, who has a following of over 35,000 people on social media, about how they build out their personal profiles and personal academic personas to help them. I know that sometimes can feel like it's, intimidating, or it's not for you. And I don't think that everyone should be on every social platform. The opposite. I think that, focusing can really be extremely helpful. And so you're all invited. All of our events have always been free and will always be free. So you're more than welcome to register there. And Alana will drop a link in the chat in case you want to register. Okay, I would be remiss, because I promised to ask you about Jeopardy. So please, before we get to the Q&A, tell us about being a two-time Jeopardy winner and a little bit about that experience, because A, that's just super cool. And B, I think, it would take me many lifetimes to get to there. So yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely kind of a bucket list experience. I kind of feel like everything's been just since then. There's really nothing left to accomplish in life.
Until today, yes.
Yeah, of course. And I taught media studies for many years. I went to grad school in Los Angeles. So getting to just see how television, episodes of television get made, especially during COVID, was pretty fun for me. And I just tried to approach it as like, if nothing else, I will get this out of it. I will get to have been here today and seen how this works. But then luck was on my side twice, and managed to get a little bit of money.
Amazing.
But very sadly, it was after Alex passed away. So I did not get to meet the great Alex Trebek, but
yeah. Got it. Well, I'm gonna disagree with your assertion that it was luck, but we'll save that debate for another time. All right, let's get to some of the questions. Cass asks, she sent a proposal to University Press, hasn't heard back. How long should she wait? It's been 6 weeks. She hasn't heard anything. Should she move on? Should she nudge the editor? What's protocol?
Yeah, this is a great question. Another really common question I get, and I have a blog post about it. If you go to manuscriptworks.com/archive, there's a bunch of stuff there, but there's one on following up with editors, and that'll answer a lot of your questions. But to answer this particular question, some presses will have a time on their website. It'll say, give us 8 weeks, give us 12 weeks. Some will say, if you don't hear from us, that's a no. I don't like those presses when they say that, because I think everyone deserves some kind of response. But if it's been 6 weeks and you have no reason to think that they will take longer than that, they haven't given you a timeline, I think it is fine to nudge. It's necessary. It is perhaps even expected that you will nudge, because editors are overworked like everybody else. They have their inboxes are overflowing. They've got emergencies and fires they're putting out. So the proposal submission may have kind of fallen off the list. So a polite follow-up, just wanted to circle back on this. Just wanted to make sure you received it. That's fine. Completely acceptable to do. And I would say you could do that twice. I would do it once, let maybe a month go by again, do it again. Then you might give up on that editor as just being too busy to deal with. But it's also acceptable to be sending out proposals or inquiries to multiple presses. So if you do want to start reaching out to other people, that's also fine to do. You can say, I've submitted this to multiple presses, but I'm interested in your press for X, Y, and Z reasons, and then maybe you will get a bite from somebody else. And then what you can do is, once you've gotten the interest from someone else, if that first press is still one of your top choices, you can reach back out to them and say, I've gotten interest from another press. Before I proceed with them, I just wanted to, make sure that you'd had a chance to look at my proposal. And I have many times seen that be the thing that gets a press to sit up and take notice and then sign that offer. So it's not sleazy to do that. Yeah. I wouldn't make that your strategy, but it's good to be transparent with everybody about the interest you've received and, that you're talking to multiple places.
Yeah. Yeah. Journals are monogamy, and books are not. So you're welcome to send to a few at the same time. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, once it's sent out for peer review, then you should inform the other publishers, that that's happening, or not send to additional publishers.
Yeah, so I would at every stage, I'd get confirmation from that editor. If you are thinking of talking to multiple places, ask them what's their policy on simultaneous submission, or multiple submission, or exclusive peer review, however you want to put it. At the proposal and sample chapter stages, some of them will be fine with other presses reviewing it at the same time. At the full manuscript stage, they often aren't. But if you've got a really attractive topic and they know they're going to have to compete, then they might be willing. But I think it's really good to just be transparent with the editor and make sure you know what their expectations are.
So following on the topic of having a popular manuscript, or potentially, Alan wants to know about agents. Are agents, in the general publishing world, we know that that's very common. Does that happen at all in academia? Is it necessary, maybe for more popular trade books?
Yeah, so it does happen. The reason agents are so prominent in trade publishing is that it's required. At many presses, you cannot send an unsolicited proposal. You have to have an agent who represents you, who has a relationship with the editor already, and kind of can broker that for you. In scholarly publishing, that is not necessary. You can approach an editor directly. Now, an agent can be helpful if you do have the kind of book that could work at a trade press, but you want to publish with a scholarly publisher. Maybe that agent could help you kind of weigh your different options. And then an agent can help you negotiate your contract. In most academic publishing contracts, there's not going to be a lot of money at stake. And agents, the way they work is they get 15% commission on the books they sell. So if 15% of what is at stake is very low, it might be hard to find an agent to represent you for that. But you absolutely can work with an agent, and university presses will deal with an agent. They're not going to think you're weird if you have an agent. Or if you bring an agent into the process, that's fine.
All right. We'll try to do rapid fire for the rest of these questions, just so we can get to everyone, sure, but not for it to drag on too long. Tinu wants to know, she had an academic press reach out to her to invite her to submit a proposal. So congrats, Tinu. That's a good sign. But she doesn't yet have a full chapter written. Is it worth, and she's considering some other presses at the same time. Is there any point in sending out an initial inquiry before she has some meat on the bone, or is it better for her to wait until she's a little bit further along in the process?
I think it's smart to wait, just because if they are interested and want to move forward, they won't be able to do so until they have a little more material, usually. Like with peer review, and they'll need something that they can peer review in addition to the proposal, most likely. And then I would say, if you have a bit more, that gives you a bit more power to not just deal with that press that approached you, which is great. But if that's not your top choice of press, you can very politely thank them for their interest and say, I will get back to you when I have something. And then once you have that complete package you feel really good about, then you go out to the 3 that are at the top of your list, or however, what small number, but however many it is. And then you have something for them all to kind of dig into. I've seen it happen where people get really excited about that initial interest, even if it's not from their top press, and they get kind of pulled along in this process. And some of these editors can be aggressive, and then kind of have regrets later. Well, it's like, well, I didn't even try with my number 1 press. Maybe if I had sent them something, they would have liked it too. So I always want people to feel good about it at the end of the day. So
yeah, and that actually relates to a topic that we deal with quite often in terms of deadlines, where an author will come to us and say, "Oh, I want you to edit my book. The press needs it back in 2 weeks. Can you edit my 400-page book in 2 weeks?" And I think there's a bit of a game that goes on with acquisitions editors, where they know that the authors are going to take longer than the deadline, so they set the deadline, a bit too early. And then there's sort of an expectation for negotiation and a back and forth. So I'm not saying, deadlines I think are very important and critical to the process, but understand that I think it's important to have a conversation and to say, okay, just because, like you said, someone's proactively approached you doesn't mean you're bound to them. Just because they've said it needs to be by this date, most likely the press will still be there 2 weeks later and will still be interested 2 weeks later, and it's okay. If you need a certain amount of time in order to do your work properly, be honest and straightforward. Don't understand that you're going to have things that are going to come up that are unexpected, and plan accordingly, and don't make promises that are going to be hard to keep or put you under so much stress and pressure that you're not able to really do the research or write the way you would like to.
100%. And I think an editor with integrity wants your book to be the best book it can be. They will want to respect your timeline, and you should not feel afraid of saying, I know that I need more time for this. If you feel like an editor is pressuring you, I would question what that editor's motivations are. They probably aren't thinking about your best interests. Right. I'll just say that.
Yeah. I always say, well, it's in your best interest to have it done by, in the end, we're all interested in this. We all have the same goal. It's quality. So that's what's most important. In terms of publishing things that have already been published and then trying to include them as part of your book, to what extent is that accepted? Is there a certain percentage that's more or less acceptable, and how do you approach that issue?
Yeah. So Beth Louie, who publishes the Handbook for Academic Authors with Cambridge University Press, she says 20 to 25% is kind of a good guideline of previously published material is usually acceptable. I've seen it go higher than that because a book really has a different market, a different readership than a journal article, usually. So if you've already published a couple things, I wouldn't stress out. If you've already published, maybe 2 of your chapters already, I would maybe stop until you can talk to an editor and find out what their preferences are. And then if you feel like there's a lot of overlapping material, you might want to address that head on in your proposal to say, well, X has been published in this journal, but it's really reframed when it appears in chapter 3, or it's only, one part of chapter 4 that has appeared elsewhere, to make it clear that there's not a competing market for the book.
Got it. Okay. There are so many questions here, but I do want to wrap it up because I appreciate your time, and I appreciate that everyone here.
And I will point, I will say probably almost every question is answered in the book proposal book.
So definitely buy the book. Yeah. No question. Yes.
And on, if you go to manuscriptworks.com/archive, a lot of what you'll want to know will be there.
Yeah, 100%. There's really great. I can vouch personally that there's great materials on Laura's website, and it's just a wealth of information. So definitely contact her when you're ready. Sign up for the course, and if you want more individual feedback and working together, you're welcome to contact myself, our team as well. Happy to help. So Laura, this has been just excellent, chock full of information. We probably could have gone on for the next 2-3 hours. I hope to have you on again some point in the near future, and thank you just for your time and your willingness to share all your collected information and spend time with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. All right. Have a great day, everybody. Take care.